I thought I had it all figured out. The perfect bakery, the perfect marriage, the perfect life. But as I walked into my bakery that fateful morning, I realized everything I thought I knew was about to crumble. The chalkboard sign outside my bakery, Julianne's Artisan Breads, usually greeted customers with a cheerful message. But this morning, the words scrawled across it made my heart sink. You think you've baked the sweet life, Julianne, but I'm about to add some sour. I stared at the ominous message, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the front door. What did this mean? Who was threatening me? As I stepped inside, the familiar aroma of freshly baked bread did little to calm my nerves. Carlos, did you see this? I called out to my most trusted employee, who was already busy preparing for the day's baking. Carlos emerged from the back, wiping the flour from his hands. Sigh, Julianne, I found it when I arrived this morning. Any idea who could be behind this? I shook my head, trying to maintain my composure. No, not a clue, but I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Just then, the sound of the bell above the front door announced the arrival of my husband, Brett. I watched as he strode in, his usual charming smile in place. Morning, honey. He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head, unable to hide my distress. Brett, did you see the message on the chalkboard? His brow furrowed in concern. What message? I just got here. I recounted the ominous warning, searching his face for any sign of recognition or guilt. Do you have any idea who might be behind this? Brett's eyes widened, and he placed a comforting hand on my arm. Julianne, I'm as shocked as you are. This is clearly some kind of twisted prank. Don't worry, we'll figure it out together. I wanted to believe him, but something in the way he avoided my gaze made me uneasy. Before I could press him further, the bell above the door chimed again, and my assistant, Elena, strode in. Good morning, Julianne. She greeted me with a bright smile. And hello, Brett. Did you two see the message out front? Isn't it just dreadful? The way she glanced at Brett as she spoke sent a chill down my spine. Had they planned this together? I studied their interactions, searching for any sign of familiarity beyond what was appropriate between an employee and her boss's husband. Yes, we saw it, I replied, my voice tight. I'm going to call the police and see if they can shed any light on this. Oh, Julianne, I'm sure it's just a silly prank, Elena said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Let's not overreact. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. But as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on, and the way Brett's gaze kept shifting between us only heightened my suspicion. Something was wrong, very wrong, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. The rest of that day was a blur as I tried to make sense of the cryptic message and my growing suspicions about Brett and Elena. Something wasn't right, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. As I went about my usual bakery routine, I found myself scrutinizing every interaction between my husband and my assistant. The way their eyes would linger on each other, the subtle shifts in their body language, it all felt like a betrayal. That evening, after the bakery had closed and Carlos had gone home, I approached Brett in our modest apartment above the shop. We need to talk, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. Brett looked up from the newspaper he was reading, his brow furrowing in concern. What's wrong, honey? Don't honey me, I snapped. I want to know what's going on between you and Elena. His eyes widened, and he quickly folded the newspaper, setting it aside. I have no idea what you're talking about. Elena's my employee, nothing more. I narrowed my eyes, studying his face for any sign of deception. Really? Because I've noticed the way you two look at each other, the way you've been spending more time with her, even when it's not necessary for the bakery. Brett let out a heavy sigh and ran a hand through his hair. Julianne, you're being ridiculous. Elena is simply a hard-working employee who I value. There's nothing going on between us. I don't believe you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think you and Elena are plotting something against me and my bakery. Brett's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked genuinely shocked. Julianne, how could you even think that? I love you, and this bakery is our dream. Why would I ever want to betray that? I don't know, I admitted, feeling the sting of tears in my eyes. But that message on the chalkboard and the way you two have been acting, it all feels like a betrayal. Brett reached out to me, but I flinched away from his touch. Julianne, please, you have to believe me. I would never do anything to hurt you or our bakery. You're the most important thing in the world to me. I shook my head, unwilling to accept his reassurances. I want you to leave. I can't be around you right now. Julianne, please, Brett pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. Don't do this. Let's talk it through. I love you and I would never betray you. But I had made up my mind. Just go, Brett. I need time to think. As he reluctantly gathered his things and left the apartment, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by a deep ache in my chest. Had I really just kicked my husband out? What if I was wrong about all of this? I sank down onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the tears finally broke free. Everything I thought I knew was crumbling, and I had no idea what to do next. One thing was certain, though. I had to get to the bottom of this. I couldn't let Brett and Alina get away with whatever they were plotting. My bakery, my life, was on the line, and I was determined to fight for it, no matter the cost. As I sat alone in the apartment, the weight of my confrontation with Brett hung heavy in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that he and Alina were up to something, but I needed more proof. I knew I couldn't take them on alone, not with the power they held over my bakery. That's when I remembered my next-door neighbor, Maggie. She was a sharp-witted lawyer, and I knew she would be just the person I needed to help me uncover the truth. I hurried downstairs and across the street to Maggie's house, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I knocked on her door, and she answered, her brow furrowing with concern as she took in my disheveled appearance. "Julianne, what's wrong?" she asked, ushering me inside. I quickly explained the situation, the cryptic message, my suspicions about Brett and Elena, and the confrontation in our apartment. Maggie's eyes widened with surprise. "Wow, Julianne, that's a lot to take in. But I have to say, your instincts sound right on the money. There's definitely something fishy going on." "I know," I said, wringing my hands. "I just don't know what to do. I can't lose my bakery, Maggie. It's my life's work, and I can't let Brett and Elena take it from me." Maggie placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Don't worry, Julianne. I'm here to help. We'll get to the bottom of this, and I'll make sure you keep your bakery." I felt a surge of relief at her words. "Thank you, Maggie. I don't know what I'd do without you." Just then, the sound of a car pulling up outside caught our attention. I peered out the window and recognized Carlos, one of my most trusted bakery employees, hurrying up the walkway. Maggie and I answered the door, and Carlos immediately launched into an urgent explanation. "Julianne, I think something is very wrong. I was doing the weekly inventory, and I noticed some discrepancies in the numbers. I think Brett and Alina may be embezzling money from the bakery." My heart sank, and Maggie's eyes narrowed with determination. "That's exactly what we were just talking about, Carlos. Julianne needs our help to take them down." Carlos nodded, his brow furrowed with concern. "I'm with you, Julianne. This bakery is my second home, and I won't let them destroy it." The three of us huddled together, our heads bent low as we hatched a plan. Maggie would use her legal expertise to help us gather the necessary evidence, while Carlos and I would continue to monitor the bakery's finances and operations. As we parted ways, a newfound sense of purpose filled me. I may have been betrayed by the two people I trusted most, but I had the support of my allies. Together, we would take down Brett and Elena and reclaim my bakery. I returned to the apartment, my mind racing with the details of our plan. I knew the road ahead would be tough, but I was more determined than ever to see it through. This was my life's work, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me without a fight. As the sun began to set, I looked out over the bustling streets of our small town, a steely resolve taking hold. Brett and Alina had underestimated me, and they were about to learn a hard lesson. You don't mess with Julianne and her bakery. Over the next few weeks, Maggie, Carlos, and I executed our plan with precision and determination. We meticulously gathered evidence of Brett and Alina's embezzlement and their plans to take over my bakery. It was a delicate dance, but I was fueled by a fire that refused to be extinguished. The day of our sting operation finally arrived, and I felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation as I waited for Brett and Alina to arrive. Maggie had arranged for a select group of community leaders and influential patrons to witness the confrontation, and I knew this was our best chance to expose their betrayal. As Brett and Elena walked through the bakery doors, their expressions shifting from confusion to thinly veiled panic, I knew the game was on. "Julianne, what's going on?" Brett asked, his voice laced with apprehension. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders as I faced them. "Brett, Elena, I've gathered everyone here today because I have something I need to share with you and our community." I gestured to Maggie, who stepped forward, a stack of documents in her hands. "Over the past few weeks, we've uncovered evidence that you two have been embezzling funds from Julianne's bakery," Maggie announced, her voice firm and unwavering. "We have bank statements, receipts, and witness accounts that prove your involvement in a plot to take over this business." Brett's face drained of color, and Elena's eyes darted around the room, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is absurd!" Brett exclaimed, his hands trembling. "Julianne, how could you do this to me, to us?" I felt a pang of sadness, but I refused to let it sway me. "Don't play the victim, Brett. We have the proof, and we're not going to let you get away with this." Elena stepped forward, her expression defiant. "You have no idea what you're up against, Julianne. This bakery is ours, and we'll do whatever it takes to keep it." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, and I knew we had struck a nerve. Maggie raised her hand, commanding the attention of the crowd. "That's where you're wrong, Elena. This bakery belongs to Julianne, and we're not going to let you or Brett take it from her. We have all the evidence we need to take this to court and ensure that justice is served." Brett and Elena exchanged a desperate look, and I could see the realization dawning on their faces. They were trapped, and their carefully constructed plan was unraveling before their eyes. "You won't get away with this," Brett hissed, his eyes narrowed with fury. I stepped forward, my gaze unwavering. "Oh, but we already have. This bakery is my life's work, and I won't let you or anyone else take it from me. I'm prepared to fight for it, no matter what it takes." The room erupted in a chorus of murmurs and applause, and I knew in that moment that the tide had turned. Brett and Elena were no longer the ones in control. I was. As the community members gathered around me, offering their support and congratulations, I felt a sense of triumph wash over me. This was just the beginning of the battle, but I was more determined than ever to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The aftermath of the confrontation with Brett and Elena sent shockwaves through our tight-knit community. Word of their betrayal and my efforts to expose their scheme spread like wildfire, and suddenly I found myself at the center of a heated public debate. On one side, there were those who rallied behind me, praising my courage and determination in standing up to the deceit. They commended my actions and vowed to continue supporting my bakery. But on the other side, there were those who questioned my methods, arguing that I had gone too far in publicly humiliating my own husband and his accomplice. As I stood at the counter of my bakery, watching the steady stream of customers come and go, I couldn't help but feel a growing unease. The community I had once thought of as my family was now divided, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had somehow crossed a line. One day, as I was preparing the dough for the day's bread, a familiar face stepped through the door. It was Maggie, her brow furrowed with concern. "Julianne, we need to talk," she said, her voice low and serious. I wiped my hands on my apron and gestured for her to follow me into the back. "What is it, Maggie?" "I've been hearing some rumblings around town," she began, her expression grave. "Some people are starting to question the way you went about this whole thing. They're saying you took it too far, that you should have handled it more discreetly." I felt my heart sink. "What? But we had the evidence, Maggie. We were just trying to protect the bakery." She placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "I know, Julianne, and I stand by you. But you have to understand, not everyone sees it that way. There's a growing sentiment that you were more interested in revenge than justice." I shook my head, my hands clenching into fists. "That's not true. I was just trying to save my life's work, my legacy. How can they not see that?" Maggie sighed heavily. "I know, Julianne, but the reality is you're facing a battle on two fronts now. The legal one against Brett and Elena and the court of public opinion. And that second one could be just as dangerous." I felt a surge of frustration and despair. "So what am I supposed to do, Maggie? Just let them get away with it?" "I can't do that, not after everything they've done." "I'm not saying that," Maggie replied, her tone measured. But you need to be careful. The more you push, the more you risk alienating the very people who could be your greatest allies." Her words weighed heavily on me as I returned to the front of the bakery, my mind racing. I had thought that exposing Brett and Elena's betrayal would be the end of the battle. But now it seemed that I was facing an even greater challenge, rebuilding the trust and loyalty of my community. As the day wore on, I found myself second-guessing my actions, wondering if I had gone too far in my quest for justice. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a grave mistake in my pursuit of revenge. I knew I had to find a way to mend the fractures in my community, to show them that my actions were not driven by personal animus, but by a deep-rooted desire to protect the legacy I had built. It was going to be an uphill battle, but I was determined to come out on top, no matter the cost. In the wake of the public confrontation, the bakery became the epicenter of a heated battle for the hearts and minds of the community. On one side, there were those who rallied behind me, unwavering in their support and outrage over Brett and Elena's betrayal. But on the other, a growing faction questioned my methods and accused me of taking things too far. The battle lines were drawn, and I found myself caught in the middle, struggling to keep my bakery afloat amidst the chaos. One morning, as I was setting up the shop, the bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see a familiar face. Dean, the talented young baker I had recently hired. "Julianne, can I have a word?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I gestured for him to follow me to the back, my heart sinking with dread. "What is it, Dean?" He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on mine. "I've been hearing some troubling things around town. People are saying that you went too far in exposing Brett and Elena's betrayal. They think you should have handled it more discreetly." I felt my hands clench into fists, frustration bubbling up inside me. "Dean, you know as well as I do that Brett and Elena were plotting to take this bakery away from me. I couldn't just sit back and let that happen." He nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I understand, Julianne. I really do. But you have to understand, not everyone sees it that way. There's a growing sentiment that you were more interested in revenge than justice." I let out a bitter laugh. "Revenge? This isn't about revenge, Dean. This is about protecting my life's work, my legacy. How can they not see that?" Dean placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "I believe you, Julianne. But you have to understand, the more you push back, the more you risk alienating the very people who could be your greatest allies." I shook my head, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "So what am I supposed to do, Dean? Just let them get away with it?" "No, of course not," he replied, his voice calm and measured. "But you need to be strategic about this. You need to find a way to win back the trust of the community, to show them that your actions were driven by a desire to protect, not destroy." I chewed on my lip, my mind racing, as I tried to come up with a plan. "Okay, so what do you suggest I do?" Dean's lips curved into a small smile. "Well, for starters, we could use this as an opportunity to showcase your bakery's strengths. We could host a community event, something that brings people together and reminds them of the positive impact your business has had on the town." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope ignite within me. "That's a good idea. We could do a baking workshop, or maybe a charity event where we donate a portion of the proceeds to a local organization." "Exactly," Dean said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "And we can use it as a chance to show the community that you're not just fighting for yourself, but for the greater good of this town." I felt a surge of gratitude towards Dean, his support and guidance a much-needed lifeline in the midst of the chaos. "Thank you, Dean. I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled and gave my arm a gentle squeeze. "That's what friends are for. Now let's get to work on planning this event. We've got a community to win back." With a renewed sense of purpose, I rolled up my sleeves and dove headfirst into the task at hand, determined to reclaim my place in the hearts and minds of the people I had once called my own. The community event we organized was a resounding success, drawing crowds of eager participants and restoring a sense of unity and purpose within the town. As I watched people engage in baking workshops, share stories, and come together in support of local charities, I felt a cautious optimism begin to take root. However, the legal battle against Brett and Elena continued to rage on, and the strain was beginning to take its toll. Maggie worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and preparing our case. But Brett and his team of high-powered lawyers fought tooth and nail to thwart our efforts. The day of the trial arrived, and I found myself standing outside the courthouse, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and determination. Maggie placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You ready for this, Julianne?" she asked, her voice low and serious. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders, as ready as I'll ever be. Let's do this. As we entered the courtroom, I spotted Brett and Elena seated at the defense table, their expressions a mask of defiance. I steeled myself, refusing to let their presence rattle me. The proceedings began, with Maggie meticulously laying out our case, presenting the evidence we had gathered over the past months. She painted a damning picture of Brett and Elena's scheme, leaving no room for doubt. But Brett and his attorneys were relentless, throwing up roadblock after roadblock, challenging every piece of evidence and questioning the validity of our claims. At one point, the opposing counsel turned their sights on me, their questioning becoming increasingly aggressive. "Miss Julianne, isn't it true that you resorted to underhanded tactics in your quest to expose my clients?" The lawyer, a slick-haired man with a sharp, accusatory gaze, asked. I felt my hackles rise, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I did what I had to do to protect my livelihood and the legacy I've built in this community. Brett and Elena's actions left me with no other choice." "So you admit that your methods were questionable at best?" the lawyer pressed, his tone dripping with disdain. I shook my head, my eyes narrowing. "My methods were necessary to uncover the truth and prevent a greater injustice. I refuse to apologize for standing up for what's right." The lawyer's lips curled into a sneer. "And yet, the very community you claim to care about has turned against you. Isn't that proof enough that your actions were more about personal vengeance than justice?" I felt my heart sink as I glanced around the courtroom, seeing the uncertainty and skepticism etched on the faces of the onlookers. Had I truly gone too far in my quest for retribution? Before I could respond, Maggie stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Objection, Your Honor. The counsel is clearly attempting to discredit my client through irrelevant and inflammatory questioning." The judge nodded, his brow furrowed. "Sustained. The counsel will refrain from making such accusations and stick to the facts of the case." As the trial continued, I watched with bated breath as the evidence mounted against Brett and Elena. Their web of lies unraveled, exposing the depth of their betrayal and their desperate attempts to cover their tracks. In the end, the verdict was unanimous. Brett and Elena were found guilty of embezzlement and conspiracy to defraud. As the judge delivered the sentence, I felt a sense of vindication, but it was tempered by the realization that the cost of my victory had been higher than I ever imagined. As the dust settled on the trial, I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of vindication, knowing that justice had prevailed and that Brett and Elena would face the consequences of their actions. But on the other, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling of unease that had taken root within me. The community that had once rallied behind me was now fractured, with some still harboring resentment towards my methods. I knew I had to find a way to mend those wounds, to rebuild the trust and unity that had once defined our little town. One morning, as I was opening the bakery, the familiar sound of the bell above the door announced the arrival of Dean. He strode in, a determined glint in his eye. "Julianne, I've been thinking," he began, his voice tinged with excitement. "I think it's time we take the bakery in a new direction." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, Dean?" He leaned in, his expression earnest. "Well, we've been through a lot these past few months, and I think it's time we use this as an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to show the community that this bakery is about more than just bread and pastries. It's about bringing people together, about being a pillar of this town." I listened intently, feeling a spark of hope ignite within me. "I'm listening,"